Hey there, delightful makers. Lynn Christensen here with Emerald Falls Quilts, and in this tutorial I am going to show you how to add binding to your project. I am going to be adding binding to my little dragon collage because it is a small enough piece that will be easy for you to see the binding all the way around. And I have my binding already cut and pressed. This binding is 2 strips that were 2.5 by the width of the fabric. So you can see right here where I have joined those 2 strips together, and I have pressed the entire thing in half. Now in this tutorial, I am showing you how I attach my binding to the front, and then I will press it to the back and hand stitch it to the back. Now, one thing to consider with your binding is the binding ends up creating a frame around your project. So you might want to test things out. I usually will fold fabric and then just push a little bit to the front like this so that I can see how it looks. And I wanted to have a frame that matched my dragon, but it is a high contrast towards this dark purple, so it definitely will create a frame. If you don't really want it to look too much like a frame, pick a color that matches your background a little bit better. Now my other side is also dark purple, so my binding is going to be very, very visible from the back side also. Now, when I do binding, I do a walking foot so that it can easily ease through all of the layers. You will have 5 layers that you are trying to sew through. You have 2 layers of your binding and then the 3 layers of your quilt. So a walking foot makes it a lot easier to go through all of those layers and pull those layers through your machine. I typically choose a thread color that either matches my binding or is a good color that blends with the 2 different fabrics if the fabrics have a high contrast, because I don't want those threads to be visible when I pull my binding to the back. Now I always start my projects on the bottom, and because this is such a small piece, I'm going to give myself a lot of extra length to start with, because I need to be able to join these ends really easily together. And I am going to actually start here because that way I'm going to have this much fabric to kind of fold when I need to join the ends. And if I started way over here, it's a lot harder to join the ends if I don't give myself enough room to kind of pull my pieces together. So I'm going to take the raw edge of the binding and I'm going to place it along the raw edge of my quilt. So we're going to sew a straight line till we get to that 1/4 inch point, and then we're going to sew towards that corner. All right, so here's my tail that I will leave loose in order to attach the other end when I come all the way around. And I have stitched from here to here with a white thread, which I was hoping would be a little more visible for you, but it may not be. And then you can see that I brought this down here to that corner. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this fabric, and this little 45-degree stitch that I've done is going to help me create a 45-degree angle with my binding. And then I'm going to fold it again, and I want this to line up with the raw edge, this fold. I want this fold to line up with this fold, and I want this raw edge to line up with the raw edge. And then I'm going to sew Now, from here down to 45 to a 1/4 inch away, and then sew my little diagonal line again. So we're sewing a straight line starting at the top all the way to a 1/4 inch, and then another diagonal line. Sorry about that, you couldn't see all that. So let's turn this. So I'm going to sew from this edge all the way down till I'm a 1/4 inch away, and then go across. Now you can use pins here to hold this piece. You can put a couple of pins in here, but the one thing that I found is sometimes your binding fabric may stretch a little, and putting too many pins won't allow that natural ease of the fabric to happen. And you need that natural ease of the fabric to just kind of work its way out. Otherwise you will end up with puckers and gaps in your binding. All right, so you can see here how my second side is done. And so what I have here is this little flap, and that is what will allow this to turn to the back. So we're going to do that again with this piece. So I have sewn all the way across and gone up at my 45 degrees. And again, I'm going to press it away from the quilt at a 45-degree angle, and then bring it back down. And I want to make sure that these two folded edges are aligned. This is aligned with the raw edge, and then the raw edges are aligned here. And then I will sew all the way down this way. All right, so we are on our third corner, and we're going to do the same thing. Lifting it up away from the center, creating that angle, and then pulling it back down. And then we will sew this side here. All right, so now we are to the final corner, and we're going to be joining these two sides once we've sewn around the corner a little bit. But I did go ahead, and my seam for my second strip was right here, and I don't want to have two seams right next to each other. So I went ahead and cut that off. So that did give me a little bit less of a tail here, which I don't love, but we'll make it work. So now I'm going to do this one last time, where I'm going to fold this up and then fold it back down. Make sure everything is nicely aligned, both at the top and both sides. And I'm only going to stitch about to here, and hopefully this will be enough to join my ends the way I want. If not, I'm going to show you how I'll end up joining them if it doesn't work the way I originally am planning. So I'm just going to stitch to about here. So I have finished my last corner, and because this piece is so small, I am not going to be able to join my bindings the way I normally do. So if you want to see the best way and my favorite way to join my binding ends, I will link that video in the description below, because it is a really great tutorial that will join these bindings and you won't even know that the bindings were joined. I am going to just fold this and then lay it where it needs to go, pulling gently. And then I'm going to just tuck this one under And you want to make sure that it's nice and tight and you don't end up with any kind of gap here. Now there's gonna be some weird stuff happening down here. Tuck it the best you can. Sometimes I will take my scissors or a pencil or a ruler, come in here and just try to tuck that up in there a little bit better. And then I'm going to start here where I stopped and stitch all the way to this line here. All right, so I have sewn down all 4 sides. Again, I don't love that, but it'll work. It is what it is. And now we're going to flip it to the back. So we are just going to pull these little corners so that they do this. And let's move these pins out of my way. Then we are just going to gently pull to the back. So when I press with the iron, I'm going to gently push, but I don't need to push really hard. And I'm really only focusing on the center area right here, not these corners yet. That's just going to help get this folding to the back. So now I'm going to fold this down. And the one thing you want to consider is if this is in the front, so when I'm looking here, this little side is in the front and this side's in the back. So when I go to press, I'm going to push this to create a little diagonal there. So we will press this, and then I will press that angle. And then I will take my finger and just kind of fold this to create that pretty mitered edge, and it sits a lot more smoothly and a lot more crisply if this is the opposite of this. So if this one's on top, then this one is on top, and this one is underneath, so this is underneath. I hope that makes sense. Okay, and I just use Wonder Clips to hold my binding in place while I stitch. Bring this over and press. Bring it over and press. And again, push this to a diagonal. And this one is on top. So the opposite corner needs to be on top on the back. So this one you can see a little bit better. So see how that one is on top, that fold. So on the back, this one's on top. And that gives you a really pretty corner. All right, so now my next step will be to get one more clip, but then I will stitch this down by hand. So I will just do a simple binding stitch to stitch all of that down, and then it will be finished. Now I will tell you the #1 secret to perfect binding, and that is choosing the right thread. You want your thread color to match your binding color as closely and perfectly as possible, because if it matches your binding color as closely and perfectly as possible, then your stitches are almost invisible and nobody will see how your stitches look. All they will see is the perfect color of the binding, and they won't see all of your little stitches. So that is my #1 secret for perfect binding. Pick a thread color that matches your binding color as closely and perfectly as you can. Now the needle that I'm using, I really don't know what kind of needle it is. I think you can see it better on that purple. That is how it looks. It has a medium-sized eye and a very sharp point. I cannot work with really small quilting needles. My hands just do not like holding those. So this is the needle that I use. I have no idea what size it is. Just find a needle that fits comfortably in your hands. All right, so we are going to thread our needle and then tie a knot in one end. Now here is how you can tie a quilter's knot. Hold your needle at the eye in your left hand, hold the tail of your thread in your right hand. And I'm going to leave this purple background here because it makes it a little easier to see for you. You're going to cross the tail over the front of the needle and then hold the whole thing with your left hand. So my left hand is now holding my tail and my needle. Then I'm going to wrap it around. I usually do like 5 or 6 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The more times you wrap, the bigger your knot. You want the knot to be big enough that it doesn't pop through. So consider your needle size. My needle is a little bit thicker, so that's why I usually do 6. Now I'm going to gently hold those loops, and then I'm going to push my needle through. So there's my little tail there, and I am holding the loops very gently so I'm still able to pull through. So we're pulling this through, and ta-da, there's your knot. So if you didn't quite catch that, hit rewind, watch that again. All right, so usually I will start close to the edge here because I'm going to need to be able to come around and do these corners. And it makes me feel like really accomplished when I get here and I'm like, ooh, I only have that little bit left to go. So I will take my needle and I'm going to just kind of lock it in place. I'm just going to push it through on the outside of that white line. And then I'm just going to tuck that little tail of thread underneath. So now my thread is being held in place. Now I'm going to bring my needle through my binding fabric, and my goal, hopefully you can see that, my goal is to get it inside that fold. Now, my next step, once I've pulled it through there, so there it is inside the fold, I'm going to bring my needle down right next to where I brought it up through the binding, and the needle is going to go through my backing. So here is my thread coming through the binding. My needle is going through the backing right next to that spot. Now you will want to make sure that you aren't accidentally putting your needle all the way through to the front. Then I'm going to bring it back up just a little bit away, again in the fold of the fabric, and then I will pull it through. And you can see right there, that's where that first stitch is happening. So again, through the backing fabric, next to where I came up, push it back through into the fold. I usually do anywhere between 1/8 and 1/4 inch away. It's about a scant quarter. The smaller needles allow you to go a little bit closer, but like I said, I can't hold those little guys. So I'm just going to continue doing a few stitches here for you. So through. Now right here where the quilting is, that is usually the part where you're most likely to go through to the front. So be really careful when you are going past any quilting. You can always flip real quick and just make sure you're not seeing your needle. If you see your needle, then you're going to see your thread. And then pull through the back, come up to the fold, pull, and we're just going to keep doing that all the way down. And I'm going to just do this all the way for you. So you can stitch this along with me if you want, because I want to show you what to do when you get to the corner. I do normally wear a thimble here on this middle finger, but I forgot to grab it. And this glittery fabric, it's really pretty, but it is a little bit stiff. So I'm having to push a little harder than I normally would when I am sewing down a binding. That metallic thread is not easy to get through. But it sure does look pretty. And sometimes we will suffer all kinds of pain for pretty things. Now here I have this little pocket. I put these pockets on because this is where my quilt is going to hang. So if you want to hang your quilt with pockets, there is a tutorial for how to put the pockets on. That will be linked also in the description below. It shows you how to do pockets and hanging sleeves. And so when I do the pockets, there's a lot of excess fabric here, and I just don't really worry about what layers I'm going through, as long as I am not going all the way through to the front. It's a lot less likely when you have the pockets and all these extra layers. If you don't want to see all of me stitching, or you aren't stitching with me, you can fast forward to the next little chapter where I show you how to sew this little corner. All right, so I'm going to take my clip here and I'm going to just put it here to hold this part down, because my fingers are going to hold this corner. And I usually bring my stitches just a little bit closer when I get to this point. Now the first thing I want to do is come up right here on this edge there. So I'm going to bring my needle up inside the fold of that corner. Now I'm going to do a couple of stitches going up here to close this fold. So I will put my needle here, and then I will come up to about there. And then I will put my needle here. So I'm doing the same stitch, I'm just doing it in the corners now. Oh, this glittery fabric is not easy. Okay, so now once I'm at the top, I can't go that way anymore. So I will turn this, move that clip out of the way just a little bit. And now I'm going to bring my needle here, so right next to it, just like I've been doing, but the point of the needle is now going to come out in the fold for this stretch of fabric. So I will pull that down. And you'll see how once I pull, how that gives me such a pretty nice closed edge there. And then I'll just keep going. All right, so you're going to continue to just go all the way around. Now you probably will need to change your thread every once in a while, which is fine. You're just going to continue stitching around, going up into that corner, going this way, up into that corner, this way, up into that corner, and then this way, and you will be finished. So that is how to hand bind your quilt. I know sometimes hand binding is like a 4-letter word for some people, but I actually find it pretty soothing. It's a pretty simple, just repetitive stitch. It's a great stitch to do when you are cozy and watching something fun on TV that you don't really have to keep your eyes on, and you can do your stitches while you are listening to what's happening on the TV and still hanging around with your family. All right, so here you can see the finished dragon with the binding all complete. So here are the corners that have been folded over, and you can see they make nice pretty pointed corners. And then here it is on the back. So I hand stitched all around and stitched into those little corners, and that has made some really pretty points and miters in those corners. Now the bottom, I went ahead and just left that open because trying to stitch it down wasn't really working, but this is what the bottom looks like with the folded under binding. It's a little bit thicker and bulkier there, like from the front. You can kind of see like how that kind of sticks out. I don't love that, but it's what I had to do with the way the fabric fell for this project. I do also have this collage that I made. This is the Lorelei, and I did the same process for binding, but I was able to do the binding method where I sewed the 2 binding ends together. Again, that tutorial is linked in the description, and you can see how you can't even tell that that's where the binding was joined at the end. And even from the back, all you can see is that seam, which is no different from the seam. I don't know if there was one in this. Oh, here it is. No different from the seam from joining the binding strips together. So that is usually how I finish my projects and how they look. This is how I bind my quilts, by machine and hand. So they are machine stitched to the front and hand stitched to the back. And I hope that this has inspired you. Now it is your turn. Go make something beautiful.